Caleb Marshall wasn't the kind of man who often found himself in the middle of trouble. At 47, he had learned to live quietly in the seclusion of his farmhouse on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, a small town tucked away in the heart of the mountains. His life was simple routine, mornings spent tending to the garden, afternoons with a book, and nights spent alone, usually watching the rain hit his windows as he sipped on a cup of whiskey. He didn't need much to be content. Peace, quiet, and a bit of solitude were all he'd ever wanted. But that Tuesday night, something was different. The sky had darkened earlier than usual, the clouds heavy with an impending storm. As Caleb drove home, the road ahead disappeared into the mist, the sound of the tires swishing through the water, the only noise in the otherwise desolate countryside. It wasn't the kind of night you wanted to be caught outside, and yet there was someone on the side of the road. Caleb's headlights flickered over the figure, a lone biker standing next to his motorcycle. The bike was leaning awkwardly, its tire clearly flat. The man drenched in the heavy rain. Caleb could have kept driving. After all, he didn't know, this person didn't know him anything, but something about the situation tugged at his conscience. The biker looked exhausted, like he'd been out in the storm for hours. He sighed and pulled the truck to the side of the road, the tires sliding slightly on the slick gravel. Rolling down his window, Caleb called out, "Need a hand." The biker glanced up his face, half hidden under the brim of a black helmet. His eyes were hard to make out, but Caleb could sense the wariness in his posture. The man grunted in acknowledgement. "Got a flat," he said in a voice that was low, almost drowned by the rain. "Can't get it fixed until the storm clears." Caleb, despite his instincts telling him to keep going, felt a pull to help. There was something about the biker, something familiar, something haunting about the way he carried himself. He grabbed a spare tire from the back of his truck and without a second thought began to help him fix it. As the storm raged on, the rain soaked them both, but neither man said a word. Once the tire was fixed, the biker nodded, his voice barely audible. "Thanks, man. I wasn't sure anyone would stop." Caleb didn't know what made him ask, but he did. "Where you headed?" The biker shrugged. "No real destination, just passing through." With that, the biker mounted his bike, revved the engine, and rode off into the rain, leaving Caleb standing there with a strange nagging feeling in his gut. Little did Caleb know, this simple act of kindness would be the spark that set off a chain of events far beyond his control. That night, as Caleb sat on his front porch, the weight of the day began to settle in. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick fog that clung to the trees, shrouding the landscape in a ghostly haze. The air was heavy with moisture, and the world outside felt eerily still, as if holding its breath. Caleb couldn't shake the image of the biker from his mind, the quiet gratitude in the man's eyes, the weariness in his voice, the way he seemed like someone running from something. It wasn't the first time Caleb had come across a stranger in need, but something about this encounter felt different. There was a strange connection, even if he couldn't quite explain it. He brushed it off, however, attributing it to the lingering tension from the storm. After all he had done, a good deed. Helping people was part of being a decent human being, right? He went inside, locked the door behind him, and sat down to a simple dinner. As he ate, his thoughts drifted to other things. The night wore on, the wind picking up once more as the fog thickened. It was around 11 p.m. when Caleb first heard it. The rumble of engines far off in the distance, the low growl of motorcycles cutting through the silence. At first, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. The storm, the fog, the isolation of his home, all working together to create the illusion of sound. But then the noise grew louder. It was unmistakable now. A convoy of bikes, dozens of them approaching rapidly. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, the sudden chill of the night air hitting him like a punch. His heart began to race as the motorcycles grew closer, their headlights cutting through the fog like a wall of fireflies. Panic bubbled up in his chest. Who were these people? Why were they coming here? He didn't recognize the sound of any particular group, and the sheer number of bikes suggested something more than a casual ride. The first of the bikes pulled onto his driveway, the engine roaring as it slowed to a stop. One by one, the motorcycles began to park outside his farmhouse, their riders clad in dark leather jackets and helmets. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. The numbers were growing 5, then 10, then 20. The sound of tires crunching on gravel filled the air. He couldn't see their faces, but their presence was ominous, looming over him like a storm he couldn't outrun. His mind raced. Had the biker he helped earlier brought all these people here? Was it some kind of biker gang or club? Was he in trouble? The last bike pulled to a stop, and then as if on cue, the riders dismounted in perfect unison. The air felt heavy with their presence, the fog hanging thick around them as they stood in complete silence. Caleb's pulse quickened. He wanted to run to lock the doors to get out of there, but something held him in place. He had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but deep down, a part of him knew that running would only make things worse. A man taller than most approached him from the group. He was wearing a dark leather jacket, a patch on the back that Caleb couldn't make out in the dim light. The biker's face was hidden under a black helmet, but his posture was calm, almost calculated. "Evening," the man said, his voice deep and steady. "Hope, we're not disturbing you." Caleb's heart was pounding in his chest as he managed to force out a reply. "What's going on here? Who are you people?" The man stepped closer, his eyes hidden beneath the visor of his helmet. "We're just here for a visit." Thank you for your kindness. Earlier." Caleb's mind reeled. What did he mean? A visit, eh? Thank you for what he had just helped a guy with a flat tire. It wasn't anything special. Why had all these people shown up? The man paused, and for a moment, the entire group stood motionless, their eyes on Caleb. There was no shouting, no demands, just an unnerving silence. Then the man spoke again, his voice cutting through the quiet night like a knife. "You helped someone who didn't ask for help. That means something to us," he said. "Now you'll understand why we're here." The tension in the air was palpable, and Caleb's instinct screamed for him to run. But his legs felt frozen, his voice trapped in his throat. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into. "Who are you?" Caleb managed to ask, his voice shaking. The man smiled, a slow, eerie grin that Caleb couldn't see but could feel. "You'll know soon enough." And just like that, the man turned and walked back to the group, leaving Caleb standing there in the fog, his mind swirling with questions and fear. The next morning, Caleb woke to an eerie quiet. The bikes were gone, but the unease in his chest remained heavy and persistent. The sun had barely begun to break through the fog, casting a pale light over the land, as he stepped outside, still wearing the same clothes he'd put on yesterday. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed overnight, something he hadn't fully understood yet. When he reached his front door, he noticed an envelope resting on the welcome mat, its crisp white surface stark against the worn wood. There was no stamp, no return address, just his name written in elegant flowing script. Caleb's stomach twisted with uncertainty. He bent down to pick it up, his fingers trembling slightly as he held the paper in his hand. This was it. This was the answer to all the questions that had been swirling in his mind. What had he gotten himself into? Inside the envelope, he found a single sheet of paper. The letter was typed, but the font was old, almost as if it had come from a time long past. The message was brief but powerful. "To the man who helped our brother in need. You may not understand now, but you will soon. What you did was more than a simple act of kindness. You saved a life, and that life has a legacy. We are the ones who carry that legacy, and we will ensure you know the full story. The debts we owe are not repaid in simple ways. You've earned something more, a place among those who remember what it means to protect, to sacrifice, and to honor. Be ready." Caleb stood frozen on his porch, the letter clutched tightly in his hand. His heart thudded against his ribs. What had he saved? Who were these people? Really? The biker with the flat tire, was he someone important? Someone dangerous? His mind raced as he went inside, sinking down into the nearest chair. He tried to make sense of the letter of the bikers who had come the night before, of the cryptic message left behind. The words seemed to echo in his head, growing louder with each passing second. He had no idea who these people were, but they clearly knew something about him, something he didn't understand. Caleb had always been a quiet man, preferring solitude to the chaos of the outside world. He had never asked for attention, had never wanted to get involved in something larger than himself. But now it seemed the world had found him, and he wasn't sure he could escape it. Suddenly the phone rang. Caleb's hand jerked as he reached for it, his heart in his throat. It was a local, number one, he didn't recognize. Hesitantly he answered. "Hello." His voice sounded hoarse. "Caleb." The voice on the other end was low gravelly. "You don't know me, but you'll want to listen carefully. Those people you helped last night? They're not just bikers. They're part of something much bigger. I've been watching them for years." Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The voice didn't answer directly, but Caleb could hear the urgency in the man's tone. "You need to be careful. That letter you found. It's a warning. Those people, they're legacy keepers. They've been around longer than you can imagine, and they don't just repay kindness with gratitude, they expect loyalty. The line went silent for a moment before the voice continued. You've stepped into something far beyond your understanding, Caleb. And it's not just about helping someone with a flat tire anymore. Be careful who you trust. The call ended before Caleb could respond. He stared at the phone in his hand, the words of the stranger echoing in his mind. What had he gotten into? Who were these people, and why had they singled him out? And most importantly, what kind of legacy had he unknowingly become part of? As the weight of the situation pressed down on him, Caleb could feel his world shifting, unraveling in ways he hadn't imagined. This wasn't just about a good deed. It was about something much darker and much more dangerous. He had no idea where this road would lead, but one thing was certain: there was no turning back now. The days that followed felt like a blur to Caleb. The strange call, the cryptic letter, and the bikers who had surrounded his house. Everything was moving faster than he could process. But one thing was certain: he could no longer pretend he wasn't caught in something far larger than he had ever imagined. He had tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to him, like the cold rain on the night he'd helped that stranger. The pressure was mounting, the mystery deepening, and every moment felt like a countdown to something he couldn't control. It was late one evening when Caleb heard the unmistakable sound of motorcycle engines rumbling down his road. He froze his hand instinctively, going to the edge of the counter, as if he could somehow brace himself for what was coming. The engines grew louder, and before he could even think about moving, the roar of the bike stopped, followed by the sound of tires screeching to a halt. His heart skipped a beat. This time, they were here, and there was no doubt about it. Caleb quickly peered out the window, and his breath caught in his throat. Dozens of motorcycles had parked on the edge of his property, a sleek line of chrome and leather that seemed to stretch beyond what he could see. The bikers dressed in their dark leathers began to dismount. There was no conversation, no noise. They simply moved with purpose, as if they were following an unspoken command. He saw the same group from the night he had helped the man with the flat tire, but this time the number was far greater, and something was different. The air felt charged with a quiet intensity that sent chills crawling down his spine. He rushed to the door, almost on instinct. But as his hand hovered over the doorknob, he hesitated. What did they want from him? Why were they back? The letter had warned him, but nothing in the world could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. As if on cue, one of the bikers stepped forward. Caleb didn't recognize him, but his posture and the way he carried himself screamed authority. The biker was older than the others, his face hardened by years of experience, his eyes cold but somehow knowing. The others stepped aside, forming a loose circle, creating a space between them. It felt like a ritual. The biker approached Caleb slowly, each step echoing in the otherwise clear air. I know you're wondering what this is all about, the man said, his voice low and proud. But it's time you learn to trust. Words hit Caleb like a punch to the stomach. He had been waiting for answers, but now Caleb was I didn't ask for this. His eyes flickered nervously. No, you didn't. The man agreed, his voice steady and reassuring. But you helped one of our own, and that means you're part of something now. Something much bigger than just a simple favor. You've been pulled into a story that's been unfolding for decades, and we've come to ask you to ride with us, to honor a legacy that's been forgotten. Caleb's confusion deepened. Ride with you? What are you talking about? I just gave a guy a hand, that's all. The biker shook his head slowly. It's never that simple. You see, those of us who belong to this brotherhood, if you will, have been operating in the shadows for years. We're the ones who make sure the forgotten don't stay lost. The ones who fight battles that no one else even knows are happening. Your actions, they've reignited something. Caleb's mind raced. This couldn't be real. It sounded like some twisted, far-fetched story, but the look in the man's eyes told him otherwise. And as the bikers silently gathered around, he began to feel the weight of their presence, the history, the power, and the sheer magnitude of the network they represented. They won't stop now. The biker continued, his voice carrying a grave tone. You've awakened a spirit, Caleb. The ghosts ride again. A shiver ran down Caleb's spine. The phrase echoed in his mind, and he began to understand, though he didn't want to. The ghosts. They weren't just bikers, they were something else entirely. a force, a legacy. And Caleb had unknowingly stepped into their world, a world he now couldn't escape. The leader nodded once, signaling the others to move. As they walked past him, the biker paused, turning to face Caleb one last time. "Are you ready to honor the legacy?" the man asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. His pulse raced as he looked around at the men and women who had gathered. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, their expectations pressing in from every angle. This wasn't just about helping someone anymore. This was about something far larger than he could comprehend. Caleb started, his voice shaky. "I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know what this is. What do you want from me?" The biker smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll find out soon enough. We've come for a reason, and now you're part of that reason." And with that, he turned, disappearing into the shadows, as the rest of the riders mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life. Caleb stood frozen, his heart racing as the roar of the motorcycles faded into the distance. Something was starting, and Caleb had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. The next few days passed in a haze for Caleb. After the bikers had left, he tried to return to his routine. The diner, the small town, the quiet life he'd always known. But everything had changed. The letters kept coming, mysterious and cryptic, and with every one, the weight of what he had gotten involved in seemed to grow heavier. The bikers had left a mark on his life that couldn't be erased no matter how hard he tried to push it away. It was a rainy Thursday evening when it happened again. Caleb had just closed up the diner and was about to head home when he heard the familiar rumble of motorcycles approaching. His heart skipped a beat. He was used to the sound by now, but this time it felt different. The air was thick with tension, and as the bikes pulled into the lot, Caleb knew that something was about to unfold that would push him even further into this unknown world. A dozen or so bikers dismounted and began walking toward him, but this time they weren't silent. The leader, the one Caleb had spoken to before, came forward first. His expression was more serious than ever, his face shadowed by the rain and the dim light from the diner. "You've been asking questions." The leader said, his voice firm, but with a trace of respect. "And you're getting closer to the truth. But not all answers are meant for everyone. Some of this, it's a code, a set of rules you need to understand if you're going to move forward, if you want to honor the legacy." Caleb's throat tightened. He had never been one to follow rules, never been one to adhere to some secret code. But the idea of backing out now, of letting this slip away, didn't sit right with him. There was too much at stake, too much left to uncover. The leader handed him a small envelope sealed with a wax insignia. Caleb recognized it was the same symbol that had been etched onto the bikes of the ghosts, the same symbol that had appeared on the letters. "Open it when you're ready," the leader said, his eyes locking with Caleb's. "But be warned, once you do, there's no turning back." Caleb nodded slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. He hadn't asked for this, but now that it was here, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be a part of it. There was a reason he had helped that biker on that rainy night, a reason that was much bigger than anything he had ever imagined. As the bikers started to leave, Caleb stood there staring at the envelope in his hands. The storm was picking up the rain, falling harder, and yet it felt like the calm before something even bigger, something that would change everything. Inside that envelope, Caleb knew, was the key to understanding the code that had been hidden in plain sight all along. He could feel it in his bones, the pulse of something ancient and powerful. And with every second that ticked by, Caleb realized that his life was no longer just his own. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. With a deep breath, Caleb tore open the envelope, knowing full well that whatever was inside would push him further into the world of the ghosts. A world that now seemed to be calling his name louder and louder with each passing moment. The code within the storm was about to reveal itself, and Caleb had no choice but to follow. The sun had barely risen when Caleb found himself standing in the middle of his living room, staring out of the window. The once quiet street was now a battlefield of silence. His house had been surrounded by nothing but the oppressive stillness. He could feel it pressing in on him, like the calm before a storm, and a weight in the air that was almost suffocating. The bikers had disappeared after their last visit, leaving him with the envelope. Caleb hadn't dared open it until the night was deep enough to feel truly alone. What he had found inside had sent shockwaves through him. A map, coordinates. But it wasn't just a map. It was a blueprint to something larger than he could have ever imagined. This was the moment he realized his simple act of kindness was far from ordinary. He had opened the door to a world he wasn't prepared for. The rain had stopped, but the silence remained thick. His phone buzzed, breaking the heavy quiet. Caleb hesitated, then glanced at the screen. No message, no calls. Only a notification from an unknown number. Your house is not safe anymore. You have one chance. Act quickly. He stared at the message, unsure of what to think or do next. His hands trembled, but Caleb knew one thing for certain. Now things were spiraling out of his control. The bikers had warned him about the legacy, about the code, but nothing prepared him for this. He thought he was helping someone, just another stranger on a rainy night. But now it was clear he was a part of something much bigger. The sound of motorcycles echoed in the distance. His heart thudded in his chest faster than before. He wasn't sure if it was the same group of bikers or if something else was about to happen. Either way, they were getting closer, and Caleb's instincts screamed at him to run to hide, but his feet were frozen. It felt as if the house itself had become a trap, the walls too close, the air too heavy. Then, without warning, the motorcycles stopped. The noise vanished. He couldn't hear anything, not even the usual hum of the nearby highway. A perfect, deafening silence filled the air. Caleb's mind raced. Were they waiting, or was something about to happen? His gaze shifted nervously between the door and the window, unable to shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. He heard a knock at the door. It was soft at first, almost tentative, as though whoever was on the other side was unsure whether to announce their presence, but Caleb could feel it in his bones. It wasn't just any knock. It was deliberate, measured, as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath for what came next. He walked slowly toward the door, his heart in his throat. The house was still, and yet he couldn't shake the sense of looming danger. This wasn't just about a flat tire on a rainy night anymore. This was something deeper, darker, with consequences he could never have imagined when he'd stopped to help that biker all those days ago. When he opened the door, Caleb didn't see the biker nor any of the familiar faces from the ghosts. Instead, standing in the doorway was a man dressed in a dark, nondescript suit. His face was stern, unreadable, but his eyes held an urgency that Caleb couldn't ignore. "Caleb," the man said, his voice low but firm, "you've made a mistake by getting involved, but now you're the only one who can fix it." The man stepped forward, the tension in the air thickening with every word. Caleb wanted to ask what he meant, what was happening. But before he could speak, the man motioned to the street behind him. Dozens of bikers had gathered in front of his house, but this time they weren't revving their engines. They stood still like statues, watching Caleb with piercing eyes. The legacy? The man continued his tone. Like, gravel isn't just about what's been passed down, it's about who gets to decide who survives it. The code has been cracked, and now, Caleb, you've become part of it. The question is, will you walk away or fight for what's left of your world? As the silence stretched, Caleb's mind raced. His house, his life had all been enveloped in something far greater than himself. This wasn't a question of whether he could walk away. It was a question of what he would lose if he didn't face whatever was coming next. The house, surrounded by silence, now felt like the center of a storm, and Caleb knew deep down that it wasn't going to pass quietly.